Hello, everyone. Hello to our panelists. I'm very pleased to moderate this panel, during which we are going to talk about some new initiatives that are driving large-scale market transformation. Our very special guests come from completely different fields. And we are bringing them together today to explore what's coming up and what are the interconnections between the digital space, legislation, and social equity in supply chains. So let me briefly introduce our guests. We have Natasha Franck in the middle, the founder and CEO of Eon, whose mission is to connect every item with a digital ID to make products more traceable, intelligent, and valuable. Their technology has been at the forefront of digital transformation in fashion retail. And in 2021, Natasha partnered with His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, to steer a commitment from the CEOs of leading luxury brands to introduce digital IDs across all products by 2025. Bente Bauer on your left, my right, here is the co-founder of 2B Policy, a boutique consultancy based in Amsterdam that supports organizations and businesses in navigating and integrating policy into their strategies and operations. Also, as a director of public affairs at Policy Hub, Bente oversees the work and engagement on EU legislation of the Hub, which represents more than 700 brands, retailers, and manufacturers. And then here, on my right, Nora Rizzo of Grace Farms Foundation is the foundation's first ethical materials director for the Design for Freedom movement. And she has led the development of the Design for Freedom toolkit, driving awareness of social fairness in the built environment. Nora has spent over 15 years creating change in the built environment through sustainability, resiliency, and social equity work. So she currently serves on the board of directors for Mindful Materials and the Connecticut Green Building Council. So welcome to Circular Shift. Let me ask you a first question. So you bring a diverse range of experiences and insights here today. So while you operate in different fields, we will try to identify some touch points and the connections to help the audience as well navigate the transforming landscape. So let's start from hearing the story of how each of you has come to this place in sustainability. So what led you to this line of work? Nora, let's start from you.
Yeah. I think my journey started when I was a child, really, and I think a lot of people who are of my generation, I think, came to sustainability in the same way. We didn't have the typical avenues and pathways to get into the field initially. I went to school a few blocks from here at NYU, and it wasn't possible for me to major in sustainability even at a progressive school like NYU. But I think I've always had this connection to nature. And I think that my initial connection as a small child started really with animals. And so that's, I've been a vegetarian for most of my life. My Sicilian mother still thinks it's a phase. But it's something that was always important to me. And I think, my journey led me to the construction industry. And so I was director of sustainability for a commercial contractor, developer, and property manager for many years. And, I was always the only woman at the table and on the job site. And I think that was a huge part of my journey and really kept pushing me into, digging deeper into sustainability and what does that mean and how can we be sustainable if we don't have the right people in the room and we don't have an inclusive conversation. So that was always incredibly important to me. And then using kind of that sustainability experience and moving more into materials and what does that mean and how are we creating these spaces that we live, work, and play in and make sure that they're not only equitable for the people that are within the spaces and healthy for occupants, but also for the laborers and the workers and the harvesters and the extractors and the producers who are making these goods possible for us to have an experience in our spaces. So I think it's been an interesting journey. I think all of us who have been doing this work for a long time have seen, how it started from this kind of environmental conservation aspect and then really went into healthy materials and now, embodied carbon is top of mind for everybody. But I think we're really getting into kind of this fourth wave of sustainability and the social equity piece and what does that look like and how do we talk about it differently while using kind of all of the decades of experience that we have, and reminding ourselves how hard it was in the beginning when we were asking for material ingredients and we were asking for EPDs and we were asking for these types of things that are almost becoming the norm, and making sure that we're continuing to push for what we want to see.
Bente, what about you? Yes, what has brought you to this line of work? Can you tell us about?
Yeah, I find it interesting because I have an academic background in sustainability, and maybe I was one of the lucky ones to indeed study environmental sciences and politics, because, let's say, of my personal theory of change, but also what I've learned throughout my career is that indeed policy can be such a driver for change and really shift the dynamics of markets, of businesses, but also of how consumers interact with their products. So I initially started working on the textile sector, which came as an accident because I was in Amsterdam and there was a nice position. But what I realized very quickly is that I found the sector so fascinating for the reason that Anna just explained, that it has all the sustainability challenges here that you can imagine, and at such a scale that is frightening. So that was when also in 2020 I founded, together with Baptiste, the other co-founder of To Be Policy, to indeed help companies in this new shift of upcoming legislation. Because there's one big challenge I realized, and that was also something we touched upon earlier today, which is that it's sometimes hard for different audiences to speak to one another. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is that businesses don't necessarily understand the language of policymakers. Mm-hmm. And that it needs time, but also help and resources to, first of all, navigate that landscape, which is so quickly evolving with the EU Green Deal in Europe, at least, that is upcoming. The expectations towards companies when it comes to legislation is completely different compared to a few years ago. And then as a next step, once you have navigated that landscape, how do you translate that actually into operational changes? Because in the end, you need to make this work. And this is what we do at To Be Policy, is building the bridges between organizations and businesses and the policymakers to basically translate and help them to understand one another.
Great. And what about you, Natasha? What has brought you to this line of work in sustainability?
Yeah, thank you so much. I can vouch for her. We work together too. So her organization is wonderful. I'm Natasha, founder and CEO of Eon. I came into, well, one of the early influences for me was actually Cradle to Cradle. I remember reading it, I think I was like 16. So very inspiring. And, you know, from there I studied art history. I don't know why. But I worked in smart cities, a born and raised New Yorker. I wanted to make cities that were healthy and equitable and livable, and I felt cities were sort of young and idealistic, but like the ultimate democracy or utopia. And through that work, started working on large-scale urban planning projects throughout all parts of the world, and it was really upsetting that one of the things we really couldn't solve for was waste and pollution. And so I became kind of obsessed with trash. And so I've been to all the waste management sites in the New York City area. And basically, it was interesting to me because, yes, I was obsessed with trash, but I was also really focused on the business model issues that developed in waste, and became really obsessed with the idea that if every single product had a digital ID, right, if every single product could tell you exactly where it's made of, then, you know, we could basically manage that waste, right? We could sort and separate it automatically, and those design principles that we, you know, when we design a perfect Stella McCartney product with the right cradle-to-cradle materials, unfortunately, a lot of those products are ending up in landfill right next to the H&M product, right? So the design intentions are somehow lost at end of life. And so this idea that the product ID would allow products and materials to be sorted and separated, and then I followed that up the value chain. Well, actually realized that the digital ID is just the barcode for the circular economy, and basically the ability to manage assets and products and materials. And when you look at, you know, a digital ID is really just a digital twin, and when you look at some of the most disruptive technologies in terms of how we live, they're really digital twins, right? Uber is a digital twin of the car, Airbnb is a digital twin of the home. Now we're moving into a world where you will have digital twins of your physical products and, you know, barcodes for every asset. And so that was my journey.
Great, thank you. Well, these are all amazing stories of creating a big, large-scale change. And so staying with you, Natasha, you talk about the digital product passport. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us what is the role of the passport in circular products and materials, but also in igniting business transformation.
I guess maybe I'll explain what a digital passport is. So basically a digital passport is, there's legislation in the EU for this, is every single physical product will basically have to have a unique digital twin in the cloud. So like a Facebook page, right? A data profile that tells you exactly what that product is, where it came from, its materials, its labor, right? A bunch of data points that the EU is deciding about that. Now that data also has to be linked to the physical product, right? So there has to be like a QR code or an NFC or an RFID tag in this product that can tell you basically what it is. And that product basically has to have that ID embedded, so that ID can be used to, scan and ID the product for resale, scan and ID the product for recycle, and also the customer can scan it and access various features and services and capabilities around that. And so basically the reason that the digital ID is so impactful, in my opinion, and hopefully yours as well, is basically it solves for the biggest barriers to sustainable business model transformation, because now brands can start to manage their assets post point of sale. They can actually drive ongoing revenue from products that they've already produced. So for example, we work with Chloe, a brand, and they have the digital ID in every product. When the customer scans a product, they can instantly resell that item, and it goes back in through Chloe's system, and they click more revenue off of that product through the second life. So we're moving brands into how do they monetize assets that are already out in the world. And then now also it operationalizes the resale. A lot of the resale models aren't profitable or aren't efficient, and the recycling models aren't scalable because you can't ID information about the products and materials. Like your ThreadUp is picking up that product and they're spending hours kind of manually re-IDing that product and re-photographing it and typing the MSRP and the description. And basically we've made buying so seamless. We have one-click buy, and basically now with digital ID you can have one-click sell. The customer can scan the product and instantly upload it into eBay or something. And so you're creating the seamless movement of products through the digital twin, then also enabling all of the design intentions that are put into the product at inception, especially if you're using principles like Cradle to Cradle, to carry forward. So the product can share that information to the recycler and be sorted and separated.
Nora, let's turn to...
I'm jealous. Can we get that?
Well, I mean, you have done some amazing work also with the Design for Freedom toolkit, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that. And also about the fact that it includes C2C certified, among its recommended certifications. And of course, our version 4.0 standard has an enhanced social fairness category. So what is the problem you're addressing in the supply chain, and how prevalent is it in the market?
Anna's presentation was a great kind of lead in to Design for Freedom, and we're really focused on the built environment. So we have been jealous of the fashion industry for many years. Anybody who's working in the building industry knows that we are very far behind, certainly both the food industry as well as the apparel industry. We've been able to go to the grocery store for decades and pick up an ingredient label and know exactly what's in our food and know which country it came from. We've had the same thing on our clothes, even pre-digital twin era. We've been able to know, the percentage of cotton and the country of origin for decades as well. So the building industry does not have that same standard, that same level of transparency. So Design for Freedom is really focused on that material transparency and removing forced labor from the building material supply chain. So I think there's been a lot of attention over the last couple of decades around the on-site labor that's happening on construction sites, and certainly every time we've got a World Cup or we've got some large-scale construction activity that has to go up quickly and cheaply, we see headlines all over the place. And then we forget about it for 4 years, and then it comes back again as soon as there's an Olympics. But we're really talking about the supply chain of the materials and where are those materials coming from. On-site labor, of course, is important, but really asking project teams and even consumers in general to look outside of the construction site. And when we're going to the store and we're buying curtains and we're buying furniture for our homes, or we're buying new office furniture or building a new home or commercial spaces, all of those materials are obviously coming from places, and unfortunately in the last couple of decades are coming from even more fraught places. So there's 50 million people right now around the world living within modern slavery, and 28 million of those 50 million working within forced labor conditions. So it's a very pervasive problem. In addition to that, we've got 160 million child laborers, and as Anna mentioned, certainly a lot in the fashion industry, but a lot in the construction space as well. And about half of those 160 million children are working in dangerous and hazardous conditions. we saw a great kind of, and I'm always the one where I can see the audience kind of staring at me right now. I'm always the one who has to make us uncomfortable, but I think as we heard earlier, that's kind of part of where we need to be. We need to get a little bit more uncomfortable, and we need to realize that we've got some sacrifices to make. But throughout the industry, if we add up kind of looking at agriculture, combined with mining, combined with construction, combined with manufacturing, we're looking at about 48% of all modern slavery, people trapped in modern slavery. So not to say that all 48% are absolutely working in the construction industry, but all of those other sectors do feed into the construction industry. So we're talking about a very significant portion of industry in general, and this is global. Here in the US, we do have 1 million people right now in forced labor conditions. And unfortunately, our child labor situation has gotten worse in the last few years. Over the last couple of years, we've seen 10 states roll back child protection laws, which is pretty incredible to me. And they're claiming that we have a shortage of workers. They're also claiming that it's an infringement on parental rights. I don't buy either of those excuses at all. But we are seeing that there's been an 80% increase in DOL, child labor violations here in the US, just in the last few years. So it's we're going in the wrong direction. And I think anyone who's kind of been paying attention has noticed that the New York Times at least has done a few exposés over the last year on what the child labor situation here is in the US. And with the child labor migrant population, we're seeing a lot more exploitation. And some of it is directly tied to the construction industry and the production of our goods and materials that are going into our buildings. So I think, the big impetus for Design for Freedom, we officially launched in October 2020, really focusing on this issue because we didn't talk about it. I've been going to these conferences for a long time. It's really just starting, I think in the last couple of years that people are starting to ask these questions and talk about it.
The numbers are shocking indeed. And how is the toolkit addressing
Yeah,
it?
so the toolkit came out in 2022 and really focuses on breaking down the issue. So we talk about the 12 highest risk building materials. It's timber, stone, glass, textiles, electronics, steel, concrete, basically every component of a building. And so the toolkit really breaks down, okay, here are the materials, here's where the countries of highest risk are, here's direct certifications that relate to each of these different material types. Yeah. Cradle to Cradle is referenced in there. Each of the certifications referenced in there are third-party audited and have a social equity fair labor assessment to them. There's also, I think Roxanne mentioned this morning about specifications. So we worked with Gensler on designing a Division 1 specification that people can kind of plug and play into their Division 1 specs so that this does need to be baked in early on in a project, into contracts, into specifications, or it's not going to happen. And I think anybody who's ever done a LEED project in the past knows that that's the case as well. And so the toolkit goes into that. There's a supplier questionnaire as well, which really starts to help you have the conversation with suppliers, with manufacturers, and we're working on digitizing that as well.
Wow, yeah. That's also amazing. Thanks for sharing the story. And Bente, so we've heard about policy and legislation a few times throughout the day. We heard about the New York Fashion Act, and you are working also on the EU policy. So what is happening? What are the key developments in the EU legislation that all the companies that are selling their products in the European market need to be aware of? What is overlapping?
Well, it's a big question because there's a lot happening at the moment.
Yes.
With the EU Green Deal that was presented 2019, there was this big wave of sustainability legislation that was hitting basically all sectors and still is impacting all sectors. I will just focus on a few pieces and then link to what my fellow panelists have said so far. So what I think is important to keep in mind is that the legislation is not only addressing EU-based companies, but it's addressing companies that are placing products on EU markets. So also many of the elements are, for example, forced labor legislation and due diligence legislation, what we've heard today, is also applicable for companies, for example, based in the US, if they meet a certain threshold and if they have subsidiaries in the EU, which is the case for many companies, obviously.
Yes.
So I think that's why it's relevant for basically any company globally to be also aware of all these upcoming changes. Now, two pieces I think will really change the dynamics of the market, which is one, the eco-design regulation. It's basically targeting a number of products, consumer products. So we're talking obviously textiles, one of the most impactful ones and most prioritized ones, but also furniture, cosmetics, toys, detergents, you name it. So they have a long list of prioritized products that will have to meet, let's say, summarized 2 key requirements. One, they will have to have performance requirements, and here we're talking about recycled content, durability requirements, which for textiles can be, for example, a minimum number of washes that they can last. But they also include information requirements, and here the washing list is long, from anything potential supply chain information, but also repairability information for consumers. And what the EU authorities have in mind is indeed to use DPPs, so digital product passports, as the tool for consumers, for business to businesses, and that includes also recyclers or sorters, but also governments, so market surveillance authorities, in the end checking whether the product meets the requirements, as this platform for information. And that's where, of course, DPPs will play such a crucial role, because any product placed on the market will have to have such a DPP mandatorily. Now, in the beginning, it will probably look like a data library, but it's important first step to really capture all the important data points that are out there that are relating to the product's sustainability performance. And now the other piece that I think is also relevant is the entire due diligence legislation upcoming, and that includes also a ban on products related to forced labor specifically. And it's, again, addressing all products, all companies placing products on the EU market. And as a company, you need to make sure that indeed your products are not related to forced labor. And here they're specifically looking at risk assessment. So indeed, is your product or your materials coming from high-risk regions? What are your policies in place to deal with such issues? And also there will be proper reporting and verification around this. So those are 2 pieces are just like, let's say, the tip of the iceberg. There's also more when it comes, for example, around waste legislation that is in the pipeline, but just to sketch the dynamics. And of course, that's the first time that so many sectors will be legislated horizontally. So it really creates a lot of stress from businesses, all transparency, but also a different dynamic, because basically the norms and standards will be reset. It's no longer that it's a nice to have done your due diligence to indeed set design requirements on your products. It will be the must to enter the market.
So it's so interesting how you all been making reference to each other's work. So the 3 lines of these fields apparently are so different, but so connected to each other. So let's explore a bit further. What are the connections? So let's start from you, Bente. So you mentioned about the forced labor, but also there's digital passport. So how do these developments around the EU Green Deal feed into the digital product passport? And how is Cradle to Cradle Certified linked to this work?
Well, if we take a step back, what is required from companies is a lot of data on their products that they might not currently, let's say, systemically have, and traceability. And ideally, you can verify all of these points. So that I think are the key ingredients that are currently a big challenge for companies and that they're trying to navigate. So indeed, what are the data points we need to have on our products? What is the must we need to have? How can we ensure that we can prove to market authorities that our products are not linked to forced labor? And of course, you need to then find the right partners to work with. You need to find the right tools to work with, and indeed, digital tools, but also traceability tools play a crucial role here. But also, last but not least, indeed, if you want to communicate around any of that, you need to have verification of your communication. And again, that's where Cradle to Cradle, of course, comes in. I will just name one more legislation, but I will keep it short. There's the Green Claims Directive coming in. And basically what the idea with the Green Claims Directive is that you need to substantiate your claims if you want to make a claim in the EU. And here they, for example, require you to have considered all impacts for your product, even if you just want to talk about the water. You need to prove you have done the whole assessment in order to come to the conclusion that water is important in relation to your product. So that is also where, of course, the cradle-to-cradle standards play an important role, because they can help companies indeed to prove that they have done that consideration and they have taken that into account. But there are different elements that are now, let's say, very much needed for companies, and indeed data, traceability, and verification are certainly some of those.
Yes, and so Natasha, what is your view on this? Why is the technological infrastructure needed to appeal to these policies?
Yeah, I think it's also so exciting because Cradle to Cradle has always had all the principles, kind of, right? You've had the material selection, you've had the design for durability, you've had, and the regeneration processes, but the technology basically gives those principles a way to like be embedded in the product, and a way for those design efforts to be carried forward, and a way for those design efforts to communicate, right? To communicate to the customer. So now, even for if you use a recyclable material, that's not actually visible to the customer. They have no way to see, feel, or know that. And now through the product ID, they can, right? And we do a lot of beauty and cosmetics and packaging as well. And now the customer can sort of access that whole world of investment that went into that product, which is of course critical for decision making as well. And then when it comes to those investments that are being put into those products or materials or packaging, now they can be carried forward. And so what we're seeing is, at Aeon, we describe ourselves like a sales force for your products, right? So basically, you have used Salesforce to uniquely ID the customer and to track the full customer life cycle and to increase your customer lifetime value, right? And that makes common sense. Now, you basically need to do the same for your products, right? Whether it's packaging or furniture or chairs or cosmetics, you'll need to uniquely ID that product, you'll need to track the full product life cycle, and you'll basically increase your product lifetime value. You'll be able to do unique things. So one of the really exciting use cases for us is we've now started to work with brands to ID the product, associate all the materials to that ID, and now when the recycler, like a waste management, scans that item, they can actually access that. So it's like any good natural system, like the nervous system relies on good communication, and I think basically it's like moving into almost like the Internet of Things is kind of like a really good network for communication for all the stuff that we have in the world.
Yes, definitely. So let's turn to Nora. What is the connection there? So when we look at the social equity and supply chains, what policies have shaped your work, but also what is your experience with the digitalization?
Yeah, so I mean, I said I was jealous when we started, but I truly am of these digital twin companies and technologies that are working in other industries, and we're still clamoring to try and get some traction within the building material supply chain, but I hope it's coming soon. And so we're working with, we're still an antiquated industry where we're still kind of requesting information via email and spreadsheet and PDF and form. And so we need to move away from that, because every single company is doing that on their own. There's no repository for tracking all of this information. I think it's necessary to start the conversation. It's really important for advocacy and awareness, and it's important for manufacturers and suppliers to hear these questions from multiple different people at the same time and different companies at the same time. But it's not going to get us where we need to be. It's a short-term solution. So we are looking to digitize our supplier questionnaire, and we're actively working with 3E on that right now so that it can become a digital passport, and it will live in a database where anybody can go look it up, and the manufacturer, we hear loud and clear from manufacturers, I'm getting 17 different versions of the same form, right? So we want to try and work with them. We've heard them loud and clear. We want to make it easy for people to not only request the information, but also for manufacturers and suppliers to give that information back. So we're working on aggregating that, digitizing that, and making sure that it's available for everyone. Right now, we still do have architecture, studios, design studios that have material libraries. And so everybody's kind of curated their own best-in-class group of suppliers and products that they love to work with. But that's, it doesn't make sense for everybody to be doing that individual work. And so we're also partnering with Mindful Materials, which has been a really, I think, a really great aggregator and really a proponent of this kind of cooperative competition. We can all still be competitors, but we can also share data with each other. And it only makes us stronger. And I think, again, we can kind of look to other industries and say, it is working in other spaces. Why can't we do the same thing? So we're working with them on the Common Material Framework, and I think that that's going to be kind of an industry game changer in terms of this one-stop shopping, where I don't have to choose, do I want a healthy carpet, or do I want a carpet that wasn't made with child labor, or do I want a carpet that's recyclable, or do I want a carpet that was made with recycled fibers? I mean, I shouldn't have to, as a consumer or as a specifier or as a procurement specialist, make those decisions. Right now, you still have to make those decisions. Our ultimate goal is that there is this one-stop shopping where you can easily see that one product checks all of those buckets, and you can move on and not have to prioritize what's the most important for a project. And I think anyone who's in the building industry knows that you're working with owners who have a specific goal in mind, and whether it's carbon or water or one of these other metrics, and that's all they're focused on. And every decision is kind of made to suit that goal. And I think that we're losing sight of maybe some of the more pressing areas like material health or human rights violations within some of the material sections.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the three of you for all of these insights. And I'd like to open up if we have questions from the audience.
I'm all for this, but my question is, do manufacturers resist giving out information about their potential industrial secrets or patented technologies and material composition? Has that become an issue for any of you?
Give a first perspective to it, because I think what sometimes is a challenge is that when we, for example, talk about the ESPR design requirements that will be set, it's important not to have, because those requirements will be set for the brands. So they are responsible in the end, and the retailers that sell the products in their shops or online. But in the end, a lot of the work will need to be done by the manufacturers on the ground that will indeed make the adjustment, the design adjustment, that provide the documentation in order to prove that they're actually complying with whatever is requested by them. And I think that puts a huge pressure on companies that are not necessarily in the EU, that are not yet up to date on what is coming. And it's now also indeed a discussion at European level to see how can you bring those manufacturers on board and bring them up to date, inform them actually of what is expected from them in the future, so that the documentation that is required by them can then in the end also meet the expectations of the brands and retailers that will sell the products. But it's a big, still unresolved issue, I would say.
I think there's manufacturers at all different levels of engagement at this point, right? Just like any industry. So certainly the ones that we've talked to, a lot of people are not kind of passing the buck like they did with LEED or sustainability, because they can't say no to, when we're talking about forced labor, we're talking about who's going to say no, that's not important to me, I'm not going to focus on that. So we kind of trap them in that sense, where when we start to ask the questions, they're like, some people will say, maybe I don't have the information right now, let me look into it. And they do, because they recognize it's a reputational risk, it's an economic risk. And if they're asked that question, they have to answer it. What's interesting, just in the last couple of months, we've started to hear from companies who will say to us, I want to invite my in-house counsel to the next meeting. And so that has not been happening before. This has just started to happen. And initially I was like kind of taken aback, and I was like, okay, here we go. But it's actually good, because it means they're getting serious about it, right? And it's getting to that level. So when it bubbles up to in-house counsel, then I know somebody's paying attention and really wants to do it the right way. So it's not we have the question, we have the conversation, problem solved, we move on to manufacturer number two. It's certainly a journey, it's a process. It takes a long time to get where we need to be. And we're going material by material, product line by product line. But I think one of the other things that we didn't really talk about here, and is kind of not my area of expertise by any means, but it's AI. And there are companies out there right now, there's one company in particular who has claimed to map 45% of the global supply chain. And that is the global supply chain of every product on Earth, not of one particular industry. So that the technology is there to figure this out. So if companies don't want to pay attention to it now themselves, there are other people who are going to figure it out for them. So I think that's bubbling to the surface now, and people are starting to get it.
I work a lot in textile waste and secondhand textiles, and I'm wondering if it makes sense to start IDing these secondhand textiles that we're getting access to now at this point where they are in the supply chain. And also, what does the timeline look like from a waste perspective as far as cities really adapting and being able to utilize this technology? I live in Philadelphia, and our waste system is kind of a mess at the moment. So I'm just wondering kind of how that works or what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I can take that one. I think when we look at it from a systems change perspective, we call it retroactive ID, like when you're IDing a product that's already created. It's exciting and fun and can bring life into a new, product, but it's not exactly like, it won't address the systems change components that we're trying to drive. So unless, it's kind of like the value of the barcode is the ubiquity. If you put it on 5 products, you wouldn't really be able to change your business processes. So it really has to start coming out of new brands at scale who are kind of, I guess, the problems, right? And it has to start helping them solve their main business challenges, which are how to generate more revenue without having to produce more products. So that's how we look at it, as really making the systems change shift, but definitely retroactively IDing products over the next few years, I think will start to become more normal. I mean, eBay already does it now for certified pre-owned, so it definitely helps product move through the value chain. But as a small business, I wouldn't necessarily advise taking it upon yourself as a key thing that you would have to deliver. But it's cool to help get the product back to you, actually. So if when you sell a product and it's valuable for you to make sure that the customer brings that product back to you, you could sort of retroactively tag it and use a cloud infrastructure to ensure that that customer could seamlessly resell that item back through you, and then you start to build your closed loop ecosystem with that service.